Hey, listeners. My name is Elisha, the founder of the Witnesses podcast. It's so beautiful to have you listening to our podcast. And I want you to know something that means a whole lot to me. Thank you for tuning in. And one thing I love to tell all of our listeners is it's not just about you listening, but listening to understand. Understanding is the most important thing. So important. So, you have to listen, learn, and practice. Thank you so very much and happy listening.
Hi, Hilliard. It's so nice to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak with you.
Yeah, beautiful. And thank you too for coming. Okay. Oftentimes I love to talk about the essence of this show, which is to invite amazing guests, amazing guests like Iliad to come talk to us about their triumphant stories. Because we believe that in our audience, there might be some people who are stuck up in a situation that Iliad came out of triumphantly. So by those people getting to listen to you speak, they might actually pick some information from you. I mean, the ones you'll be saying here today that might lead to their transformation. So it's all about transforming lives, transformation, and all of that. All right, Iliad. Within the next few minutes, I want us to get started with your story, the challenges that you faced, and how you overcame them. And afterwards, I've got some beautiful questions for you. Okay, Iliad, over to you.
Well, thank you very much again for having me. And my story is one of transformation, as you mentioned. For about 20 years, my professional career was really as a defense lobbyist in Washington, D.C. I worked primarily alongside technology companies and those that had emerging tech that wanted exposure to the federal government, which in and of itself is a great thing. They were saving lives and protecting the war fighters. But ultimately, it was a real dog eat dog world. It was tough. It was very competitive. And when COVID hit, um, there was nothing to do. Washington, D.C., for all intents and purposes, was shut down for about a year and a half. And in the back of my mind, I'd always wanted to be a writer. And even though that sounds like it's a giant difference between being a defense lobbyist and being a writer, when I was growing up, the reason I was interested in defense was my uncle. He was a Marine who was injured in a war and was paralyzed. And I grew up next to him. My mother was his nurse. And, I grew up at his bedside. And because of his paralysis, he was very limited in what he could do. And some of the things he could do was write, and other things he could do was imaginative, escapism, right? And some of that came in the form of Dungeons and Dragons. So when I grew up, I emulated him. I wanted to be him. And he wrote primarily horror novels and short stories for Pulp Fiction at the time, magazines, and things like that. And at a very young age, he introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons. So I fell in love with fantasy adventure and Tolkien, which became George Martin and Salvatore and all the rest, and of course Harry Potter growing up. And from there, I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but life happens, and I graduated college and ended up going to DC and worked on the Hill for a while and fell in love with that profession, which really turned me away from writing. I always wanted to get back to it. I knew I always wanted to do it. And then the silver lining in COVID happened, where everybody was sitting at home. There wasn't a lot to do. My industry was, for all intents and purposes, shut down. And instead of just sitting around and waiting, I decided to really kind of take that thing off my bucket list and write what I thought was going to be a book. But as it turns out, it had some legs, and my publisher wanted it to become a series, and now it's going to become two series. It's being adopted into a video game, which will be released in the 2025 timeframe, and it's also in the process of being converted into a graphic novel or comic book, and that should be also in the 2025 range. So I was able to make a leap from a very traditional consulting world that was based in a lot of realism and turn that into something that became a writer's career, which is based in nothing except for imagination And I'm loving every minute of it. And I wish that if there was a moment or a piece of advice that I could offer to any of your listeners is, you know, you listen to your heart, right? And even though I made some right decisions for the time, I mean, being an author, it takes a while to find a readership. It takes a while to find people that are going to buy your stuff, and just you don't make as much money as you will in other professions. And so for me, I was able to, make enough money to provide for my family and, and even some others. And this break in all of that, I tried to find that, that silver lining, the blessing that was in it. And I did. And it ended up being me changing careers and doing something that I wanted to do. And now you never have a problem getting out of bed and going to work, because all you're doing is writing fun stuff and being involved in creative projects and working with other creatives who, unlike my previous work, are very supportive, and it's not competitive. It's very collaborative. And I think that that's the kind of stuff that really helped me refine my footing after COVID. And, it's almost 4 years later, and I haven't looked back. It's just been a lot of fun. And like I said, I don't mind getting out of bed every day to go to work.
Beautiful. I love your story, Hilliard. Wow. Okay, so shall we dive into the questions now? Shall we get started with the questions?
Fire away, sure.
All right, beautiful. So I want you to imagine it. Let's say someone who wants to get into writing is asking you this question. Hey, Iliad, how does it feel um, writing as a first-time author? How did you feel? What would your response be?
Well, I'll answer that in two ways. I'll answer it in the way I felt and the way I should have felt, right? And the way I felt was I was scared, right? I didn't know whether or not I was going to be successful. I didn't know whether or not people were going to like reading my stuff. Because at the end of the day, when you're writing fiction, it really comes down to, are you going to entertain people, and are they going to buy it so that you can continue to entertain them? And some people write just for the art of it, right? They're writing to get this story on paper, and they really don't care how many people they're buying it. But when you're doing it as a career, you have to make sure you're writing stuff that will be well received and well read, and people will buy the next, right? So there's a pattern to it that makes it almost like owning a business. And I think in the beginning, like any author, you're afraid of what we call imposter syndrome. Like, am I a good enough writer to actually be a writer? And the truth is, if you are writing anything, a short story, a journal, a poem, you are a writer. You just don't know it. And sure, there are others with varying skill levels, but the first book you write is not going to be your best. It's all obviously going to be your worst. It's the first time you get on a bike. It's the first time you do anything. You're not nearly as good as you are once you're practiced at it. So, at first I had to get over this imposter syndrome and realize that I was good enough. And then when my books hit the marketplace and I got in front of readers, I found that I was good at convincing them to give it a shot. And then, they enjoyed it and would come back. I had a real nice return where people were asking for the second book and the third and now the fourth. And so, you start to build your readership with that. And so, what I should have been was excited to kind of relaunch my career in the way that it should have been, maybe from the beginning. I should have been doing this since I was 20 and not since I was 40, right? But at the end of the day, you'll live and you learn, and I've got enough time left in my writing career to write 20 books, 30 books if I wanted to. And I'm excited about that, right? So I felt like an imposter, and I had to get over that, but I should have felt excited and energized, knowing I was starting down a career path that would make most people envious. They'll be jealous of the fact that I don't go to work. I get up to write, and that's not a bad thing. And so that's something I would tell my younger self, do it earlier. And I would tell myself when I started it, don't be afraid. This is going to work out. Just put your best into it and it'll be fine. And now I look at it and say, I wish I would have done it earlier.
Wow, beautiful answer. I love that. Okay, the second one. Let us get personal a bit, Iliad. So, who are your favorite authors?
So I think my favorite authors begin at the top with Tolkien. And I think that's because he is sort of the master of the universe when it comes to my my genre of fantasy adventure. He wrote the first and the most famous of epic fantasy novels, and I try to emulate that. I think that he is the best of the best, and it's hard to find anybody to compare to him, even though there are plenty out there that write just as good stories. I just like his style, and I think he's my favorite. On the contemporary side, in the same genre, I would compare that to maybe R.A. Salvatore, who wrote the Dark Elf trilogy, or Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, who wrote Dragonlance, Brandon Sanderson, Terry Pratchett. I would say that I love the Sword and Shannara stuff. So Terry Brooks is also some of my favorites. And then here's a like a little bit of a curveball for you. I'm a big Bram Stoker fan. I love Dracula. I love his dark, um, sensual writing. I think it's really good. It was groundbreaking for the time. So I like to take my fantasy and I spin a little gothic into it, and make it a little bit more darker than maybe most, or maybe I would liken it closer to what George Martin has done with Game of Thrones than what Tolkien has done with his epic fantasy in Lord of the Rings and Hobbit. I think I'm more on the Martin side because the good guys don't always win in my books. So yeah, but I think that's fair, and I think that because I like Stoker and a few others that are like that. I do love the Gothic era. That's really kind of influenced me too, and I think that's what I would say are my favorites and how they've influenced me.
Okay, okay, I got that. All right, so the second to last question, Iliad. Um, did you weave any real life experiences into the novel? Got that?
Oh my goodness, yes. So working around politics as long as I have, I've been able to understand how government works, and taking that government that I work in today and laying it over top of sort of a new world map, because keep in mind, the realm of Warminster really doesn't exist except anywhere in my mind. So creating it, I had to create a world's worth of politics and a world's worth of currency and a world's worth of gods and a world's worth of races and a world's worth of everything, the geopolitical stuff that goes on with that. And so being around politics and seeing both it done nationally and internationally helped me understand how it works. And so I was able to use that to kind of craft the baronies and the realm of Warminster in a way that, you know, folks could identify with. Because when you're asking them to suspend disbelief to read a fantasy adventure novel anyway, you have to ground it in something that's real, right? And I grounded it there. And I would answer that also by saying my work with the Pentagon in defense network in particular, what I learned was there's always innovations coming from the government in some form or fashion. They're investing in research and development and testing and evaluation of that new technology. And I've always wondered in my novels and in the novels of my genre why there hasn't been more advancement by some of these fantasy cultures, right? And I use all the time as an example one of our more famous and contemporary heroes, Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, was the 999th guardian on the wall, and he still was fighting with a sword and a shield, and they had horses, and there was no technological advancement. So what I did was I used my experience of working with the Pentagon, and I built an imaginary city within the realm of Warminster that I've called Abacus, where there is technological innovation, and not enough that it's going to upset anybody that likes medieval fantasy, but just enough that gives my sci-fi readers hope that there is advancement. Right, there's something beyond just magic that'll give someone an advantage. And these scholars and these academicians and these inventors invent devices that are occasionally used throughout the series and the novels to give both the villains and the heroes a competitive advantage, just like the Pentagon does. So I think that, I hope that gets to the heart of your question. Is like, yes, I've definitely seen that, and of course, lastly, the characters, right? I mean, you see so many things. If you're an author, you're typically an observant person, and you recognize things that are unique in people, and you try to bring them into the novels because it brings those characters to life, right? Whether it's a scar or a tick, or the way someone says something, or the way someone handles themselves, comports themselves, dresses in a way, decorates their house in a way, something that's stunning, something that's memorable. And even for the smallest of characters, you give them that lifeline, and all of a sudden, boom, you've got something that's really real that people can gravitate and get their hands into. And I think that helps make an entirely made up fantasy world real for a lot of folks. And those are the three ways I'd answer that question.
Beautiful. I love that. It shows that you're so smart. I love it when one is innovative and creative. That's so good, Iliad. All right, so the last question. All right, so this says, let's talk about your characters. You mentioned that earlier. So, who is your favorite character in one of your books? And if you could spend a day with one of your characters, who would it be and why?
Yeah, so my favorite character is Sir Ritter of Vulcaneer. And the reason he's my favorite is I used to play that character as a Dungeons and Dragons player. Like I literally, it was a player that I took from, first level all the way up to 15th level and completed this, epic adventure that one of my friends was dungeon mastering. So for me, I had a chance to, gravitate to him as a player, and then adopting him and memorializing him in the book was easy because I saw through his eyes. And he's one of the heroes, right? And so my readership enjoys reading about him. I get a lot of praise for him at the conventions and the book signings I go to. And of course, because he was once my character, it was easy for me to write. But the one that I would prefer to take out to a lunch is a guy named Incanus Druwaith. And Incanus Druwaith is by far my most popular character. And it's weird to say it because he's an assassin. He's not a good guy. He's one of the villains. But the backstory on him that I'm writing right now, called The Black Rose, is about why he changed, what metamorphosized him to the person he became. And when you learn his backstory, you can see why he's had this change from good to evil, almost like Anakin Skywalker becoming Darth Vader. And I even got a lot of comparisons to him. I had one fan once tell me that, please don't kill Incanus Druwaith, he's your Boba Fett. As a Star Wars fan, that's high praise, right? So there's only a few other characters you can name that maybe have that kind of resonance, and he's like Boba Fett in the sense that he's not a main character, he's a sidebar character. And so I think going there and asking him at this lunch, about his transformation, and of course everybody always asks, will he ever find redemption? Is he ever going to come back, and return, or is he just too far gone? And I tell people, he's not going to tell me that at lunch, I'm not going to tell you that and be a spoiler. You're going to have to read and find out yourself. So that's a great question.
I love that. Ha ha ha. It has been a very interesting moment with you, Iliad. Oh my. It is just like as if you should keep talking and not even stop at all. I find it so interesting. Uh, 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 uh.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been my pleasure. You've been a good host, and I appreciate coming on the show.
thank you. Okay, so in conclusion, Hilliard, let's say there is one piece of advice you love to give to the audience, or specifically aspiring authors, maybe in your genre, fantasy and all of that. What would that advice be? And let us say there are someone's interested in learning more about you, getting your books. How can that be possible?
Sure. So my piece of advice to aspiring authors is, don't be afraid of constructive criticism. And when I say that, I mean, when you write your book, you're so close to it, you sometimes are often blind to the mistakes that are in it. And when I say that, um, your book goes from you to a variety of editors, and it goes out to a variety of beta readers. And by the time you get it back, you're going to get a lot of comments on it, some of which might hurt, where it might say, I don't like the direction that this went, or I think the story would be better served if you did something else. And you might not agree with everything, but if you're getting opinions that align with those other opinions, it oftentimes is right. And you might be just too close to it to understand that, sometimes you didn't write something well because the story already happened in your head and you forgot to put it on paper, or there's a hole in the plot, or, you've just done something that might not match well with contemporary readership for your genre. So I encourage people all the time to be open to constructive criticism, because it's only going to make for a better product at the end of the day. And if folks want to get a hold of me, I'm really, really, really easy to find. You can find me at www.jvhilliard.com. My social medias are at jvhilliardbooks. So if you're looking for me on Twitter/X or Instagram or YouTube or TikTok, you'll find me there. And on Facebook and Discord, you could find me just as JV Hilliard. And my books are available pretty ubiquitously. You could find them at my publisher, dragonmoonpress.com. You can find them on Amazon. You can get the ebook in about 20 different distribution channels. I have an audiobook for my stuff you can also find through Audible or iTunes or any of those that serve up those books. You can, if you just type in my name, you'll find the books.
Beautiful. Thank you so very much, Hilliard. So that's going to be the end of the show. Thank you for coming. Thank you for honoring the invite. And thank you for honoring the invite again and again. Thank you so much, man.
It's my pleasure, my friend. Yeah, thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. And happy to do this again down the road if you ever need a guest.
Same here. Same here.
Thank you for tuning in to this incredible episode. Your support means the world to us, and we truly value you. We look forward to having you join us for the next episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback is greatly appreciated.